It's Wednesday, February 15th, 2023, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the studios in the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and with me are my colleagues, Kathy Kiely and Ron Kelley. On our program this week, a reporter is arrested and removed from the scene of a gubernatorial news conference in East Palestine, Ohio, during his live shot. A few months ago, we talked about the murder of Las Vegas Review-Journal reporter Jeff German. Today, we're going to talk about his last story and how it ended up in print just about 10 days ago. And renting the American dream. We're going to talk about a story that appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution this week that's shedding light on a real estate trend taking shape across the country. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before our half hour is up, but we're going to start by talking about the Super Bowl. I should mention we record this program early in the day on Wednesdays. So at the time we're sitting down here to talk, which is about 20 after 11, the parade in downtown Kansas City hasn't yet stepped off, but there are a lot of people gathering and a lot of celebrating that's about to go down. It was a fun celebration to end a really fun game.
Yes, it was a good game. It was probably one of the better Super Bowls we've had in a while. It was a competitive game. When you have a game, Super Bowl game, you want it to be close and competitive, where you don't know what the outcome's going to be until the end. And that's what we had with this game. And so you want to keep your audience engaged and not knowing what the outcome is going to be. And so I thought that what this game was, you didn't know who was going to win because they were scoring back and forth, especially in the second quarter, second half. So from that standpoint, it was a good game.
Yeah, that was a good half for the Kansas City side.
It was a very good half for the Kansas City side. And the idea of a blowout is bad if you want to keep those ratings up throughout.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
The NFL wants a competitive game. They want that to keep the eyeballs of the audience on, because advertisers pay big money for those ads. And so if you have a blowout and you can feel the audience leaving, that's not such a good thing. So they want to be able to sell that airtime and continue to do so for big bucks.
Exactly.
So there were a lot of great storylines, this being a historic Super Bowl in so many ways that really helped fuel that 2-week downtime between the division championships and the Super Bowl itself. The idea of the first game in which there were two black quarterbacks, the first game in which there were brothers on either side of the game. And it made for a much more interesting way of keeping that 2 weeks flowing.
Yeah, it helps the journalists who oftentimes are kind of sucking air in those 2 weeks, trying to fill up the paper with stories or the airtime with stories. And so having those compelling storylines is a big help. I'm sure the journalists were happy about that.
Yeah, it kept things going and kept them talking about it throughout the 2 weeks in between the division championships, to give them something to talk about. The two brothers, the two black quarterbacks, and even brought in the Kelsey mom to talk about, had stories about her and bringing her on the shows and things like that. So a lot to talk about.
For the NFL, it also provided a bit of a distraction from some of the more problematic storylines and attention that has been drawn its way.
Yes, although the two black quarterbacks did give journalists an opportunity to point out something the NFL would probably not want pointed out, which is the lack of diversity in the coaching ranks. And this has been an ongoing problem. The Washington Post has done some really great reporting on this. And so I think you did see, I saw some stories about that. Yes, there are two black quarterbacks, but where are the coaches? And other stories that are problematic for the NFL are treatment of women by players. How much is the NFL policing that? This is a violent game. Sometimes that violence, sadly, has spread into the personal lives of some of the players. And then lastly is the question of what about the injuries?
Yeah.
And I think, those of us who are viewers really have to take some responsibility for that. As the game has been televised and there are more and more cameras and slow-mo, we've kind of celebrated the harder hits. And I think the game has really changed. And that comes with a lot of risk for the players.
It does, yeah, I agree.
And we saw a little bit of that even Sunday night, as we saw. I mean, I will be among the first to say this. Again, I'm not the football fan. You guys are football fans. When Ernest is here, you and Ernest, Kathy, have great conversations about football. Admittedly, in the third quarter, not knowing if Mahomes was going to be coming back.
Yes.
And once I had seen Rihanna's halftime show, I'm like, okay, I'm out. Like, I'm going to go take a bath. I'm going to read a book. And everybody starts texting me like, no, he's fine. Come back. You can't miss this. And that idea of the celebration of the return is also, in some ways, like, it's okay to be hurt. Get better.
Yeah. Well, I think for the players too, though. I mean, this is a big game.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you're not going to give up on the Super Bowl.
You know, for him being the quarterback, he is not going to play unless it was broken. So he was going to endure the pain and continue playing no matter what, probably.
But I think the problematic side of that, as you pointed out, Amy, is we celebrate that kind of as you're heroic.
Yeah.
But if it were your kid or your loved one, you'd say, are you crazy?
Yeah.
You know, what's going to happen? What kind of long-term consequences do you have of playing on an injury like that and exacerbating it? And there are a lot of players who have suffered long-term consequences because they did what they wanted to do, but people weren't telling them, you know, hey,
it's not a good example to be setting,
No,
especially
exactly.
for high school football players and kids, to say it's okay to continue playing on a hurt ankle or
suck
hurt
it
leg.
up, get out there.
Exactly.
And we can ice it down in 20 minutes.
Right, and
Exactly.
ultimately that could have consequences for the NFL because you see fewer parents wanting their kids to go into football. They want them to go into soccer instead.
Exactly.
So, Missouri School of Journalism, we teach journalism and we teach strategic communication and advertising. So, we're gonna put on our other hats for a second. The ads, Ron, hits, misses, things you liked, you didn't.
Yeah, I think one of the commercials that I really liked was the farmer's. I think it was called the Farmer's Dog. I thought it was very sentimental with the. Following the young girl through her adult life, the same dog. It was just very well done. It was a well done ad, and so I thought that was one of the hits. Another one that was kind of funny was the J-Lo, Ben Affleck, Dunkin' Donuts
Bring
commercial.
home a glaze.
Yes. That was kind of funny. The one that was a miss for me was the Will Ferrell GM commercial, and that's mostly because I don't know all the Netflix shows besides Bridgerton.
Right, and it focused very heavily on the product placement concept in shows. So if you don't understand the 80s themes of Stranger Things, to see a 2023 EV model of the whatever is an anachronism you're not going to quite catch. What about you? Things that stood out?
Well, you know, as you took a bath for the second half, I watch for the football.
It was only the third quarter.
Yes. Right. I watch for the football, so
Okay.
I'm not. But I did. My students, who were the ones watching the ads, told me they liked the M&M's trope that wove through
As
the
did my
various
father.
commercials.
Yes.
Okay, well, intergenerational
exactly.
impact then. That's good.
I will say the first commercial that I saw that left me staring at my TV in just complete dismay is that there's actually a movie coming out called Cocaine Bear. Like, it's literally we're giving coke. Okay. But the other one that did get me, because the movie commercials, for some reason, those I pay attention to, if only because I want to see what's coming out. This Matt Damon, Ben Affleck movie that's coming out about Michael Jordan in the shoes.
Yes.
I'm excited to see.
I saw that one. That looks like that would be an exciting movie to see.
It would.
Yes,
That one's going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
So there's something that was missing. And Kathy, I'm going to kind of point to you on this one a little bit to ask. There's this tradition that's been in place since 2004 when George W. Bush first did his Super Bowl Sunday interview, that pretty much every year the president has sat down with whichever network is doing the Super Bowl, whichever's broadcasting the Super Bowl that year, and done a 4 or 5 minute interview to talk about some issue important to the agenda. And this year, that didn't happen. President Biden did not sit down with Fox News. There had been a lot of negotiations that went on there, but that interview didn't come to play.
Yeah, I think, presidential interviews are hard to land, and there's a lot of negotiation that often goes on, which I, as a journalist, object to, actually. I think too often politicians think they're the celebrities and they can negotiate what's going to get asked about, that kind of thing. I think here, who knows? There are a lot of ways interviews can fall through, but certainly more and more Democratic politicians have openly criticized Fox as being hostile to them and engaging in false information. There's a lawsuit that we've talked about here about the election that, of course, President Biden won, and Fox personalities suggesting that it was rigged in some way. So I think, had Biden done this interview, it might have looked a little hypocritical to, on the one hand, be blasting this station and then or this network, and then on the other to be taking advantage of a primetime opportunity to talk to America. So, yeah, I'm not surprised.
As the viewer who might be tuning in for this 5.5-hour pregame special, like that's the whole day, do you care if you're not hearing from the president on some issue for 5 or 6 minutes? Does it even fit in that area?
Probably not, because usually the people that are watching the pregame show for those 5.5 hours are your diehards. I didn't watch any of the pregame show, so it's the diehards, and they probably would not have cared. They didn't care that the president wasn't interviewed,
yeah,
and they probably wouldn't even
notice.
Probably didn't even notice,
Yeah.
And didn't care, and wouldn't have wanted to hear anything he had to say. Probably in most cases.
Yeah, it's really an interruption and a day that's not about politics.
Exactly.
And oftentimes, so in that sense, I think it was probably smart of Biden not to do it. And oftentimes, when you go to a baseball game and a politician is introduced, or at a sporting event, people boo them because they're intruding on what is supposed to be an athletic event, and it looks cheesy. So I think it was probably a smart move.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what's been going on in East Palestine, Ohio.
Before we do that, can we shout out our Ms. Star?
Yes, Nick
the,
Bolton.
Nick Bolton,
Yes.
Former student of mine in journalism for non-majors, so we also know he has a full appreciation of the news media and journalism in general, scoring the University of Missouri's first Super Bowl touchdown, which isn't really the University of Missouri's, it's the Kansas City Chiefs, but yes,
But I think he
Nick.
should be claimed, and a big shout out MIZ.
Yes.
Z-O-U.
Exactly.
Okay.
Should have been the MVP.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but Nick Bolton making
Played
it
a
happen
great
in
game.
Kansas City. Let's talk about what's been going on then. Now we're going to in East Palestine, Ohio, where a freight train derailed almost 2 weeks ago. Now, there have been no human deaths or injuries that have been reported, but that train was carrying several noxious chemicals, and there have been reports in the local news and on social media of dead fish and frogs in local streams, and people are reporting that there are some strange odors that have been developing and wafting throughout the town. There's ongoing concern about the local environment, and last Wednesday, Governor Mike DeWine was in town to talk about it. He held a news conference along with the Ohio Emergency Management Agency to talk about the situation. News Nation reporter Evan Lambert was doing a live shot for that cable network when state employees asked him to stop while the governor was speaking. The situation devolved from there, ending with deputies taking down Lambert and arresting him.
What do you want to say to people watching this?
It's tough to do your job in America in 2023, but we'll keep doing it. All right.
Your legs on both?
I don't.
Yeah, I'm shift
All right. Can someone call the next server, please? All right.
I'll call Chris.
It has always been my practice that if I'm doing a press conference, if someone wants to report out there and they want to be talking to the people back on channel, whatever, they have every right to do that. So, that should not, if someone was stopped from doing that or told they could not do that, that was wrong. And it was nothing that I authorized, and certainly it would be something that I would not want to see happen. This happens, we do this, I do this all the time, and yeah. So I'm certainly very, very sorry that happened. I don't know all the facts, but he or she, whoever was arrested, had every right to be reporting and do what they do every single day.
So those last words that you had heard previously from Lambert, he was asking someone to call Nexstar, the parent company of News Nation, presumably so that they could get corporate lawyers involved. He was out of jail later that night and back on the air talking about what happened. He's not in the wrong, though, in what we've been able to see or hear so far, that this really is what reporting looks like in 2023.
Yeah, from what I could tell from his reporting, I saw the live shot actually with the news anchor and then going to him. He was talking softly. It looks like he was far enough from where Governor DeWine was talking that he would not have interrupted him. So this happens a lot when we broadcast live and when we're talking about a situation like that. So he was doing the right things. He was talking softly. He wasn't interrupting what was going on in the background. We do this all the time, so I'm not sure what the situation was with the law enforcement officers coming in and interrupting him and arresting him.
And so late yesterday, there was some video that was obtained by a local TV station. And if you're watching our show, either on YouTube or Facebook or on KBIA's website, you can see that video playing now where he was a pretty far distance away from where the podium and the news conference itself was going on. So chances are it was going to be very difficult for him to be speaking over the governor in that sense.
Yeah, I think, Governor DeWine said the exact right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think good for the reporters to have been sharp enough and on the ball enough to have thrown him that question at that moment. And he, he's a pro. He was a senator for a long time in Washington before he became governor. He's certainly seen this type of thing before, but probably the local police force has not. And I think that is the problem. When you have a major event that's national in a small town, and suddenly there's all these reporters descending on it. Somebody like DeWine, who's been in this environment for years, understands how we work. The police didn't. It looks to me like this was an overzealous reaction by employees who thought their boss was being disrespected in some way. Yeah. I mean, I looked up the guy who's the head of the National Guard who was apparently involved in this.
Yeah, you could see him walking across.
Yeah,
at least I'm presuming that's him. He was in
record,
fatigues.
And so I just think this was really an overreaction, and they should probably just drop the charges and give it up. And I think DeWine's reaction was absolutely appropriate and good for him for saying what he said.
No, I agree. He did give the exact right answers to that question.
And so very early this morning, I saw some video that was floating around that presents a little bit of I'm shifting gears slightly, a similar situation that had happened, but not similar at all, in the sense that there was a reporter for the Today Show that was in Turkey, where rescue efforts are underway following the massively deadly earthquake. And the reporter is going live in front of a large pile of rubble as there are rescue efforts and recovery efforts underway. And you hear someone repeatedly saying, "Stop, stop." And then the reporter says, "I'm being told I can't report and I can't speak in this area because the noise is making rescue efforts impossible, but I'm going to keep going." How's that a different situation?
That's a different situation because there's a life involved here. They're trying to save lives. And so in that situation, they needed the reporter to be quiet because they're trying to listen to see if anyone's still alive under the rubble. In that situation, it does make sense for them to ask the reporter to be quiet so they can listen to see if anyone is still alive under the rubble. That is totally different from the situation with the reporter in Ohio, where they were far enough from where the governor was speaking. So those are two very different situations. One was understandable for them to ask the reporter to be quiet. The other one was not.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And the way the reporter should handle that is to say, "I'm being asked because rescue work is underway." People explain it just the way you did. Mm-hmm. "So we will be coming back to you later Amy,
Yeah.
and the
not
studio would know
continue
how to
going.
handle
Yeah.
that. Yes,
Yeah.
no.
Yes.
So there's a pretty neat series that launched this weekend in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that looks at the impact of corporate real estate investors on local housing markets. What's happening in rates that are even higher in the Atlanta area is that investors are buying up housing inventory and then inflating the rental market there. And what makes this project so interesting to me is that it's a genuinely local story that could be repeated almost anywhere in the country, even right here in Columbia, Missouri.
Oh, especially right here in Columbia, Missouri, where the housing market is horrific. It's very difficult, I think, for people who are earning just standard wages to find affordable housing. I think this is really an example of local journalism at its finest. And it is why we talk so much and with such concern about the future of local news, because this is not a story that the New York Times is going to do for the people of Atlanta. As great as the New York Times is in many other ways, it is not a story that the Washington Post is going to do for the people of Atlanta or Columbia, Missouri. It can only be done locally. And so I think that's why it's really important that we make sure that we support local news outlets, because it's only by having the boots on the ground that we're going to be able to find those stories, to understand what's happening, and to start to connect the dots, and then to do the labor-intensive work that you have to do to create that kind of a report.
Yeah, I totally agree that this is where local news is important to your communities, to explain why we don't have enough affordable housing, what's causing that issue. I think we've even done some stories here in Columbia. Even our students in some of the classes that we teach have gone out and tried to understand why we don't have enough affordable housing in Columbia, because there is not enough, especially houses under like $250,000 that are affordable for your middle or lower middle class families.
Or even 2-bedroom apartments that go for less than $1,000 a month.
Exactly.
And that was an issue that was brought up during several points of the public comment in last week's city council meeting, specifically somebody who talked about their lease renewals coming up and that their rent had gone up something like 17% over the last 3 years. And really looking now that we are, and maybe this is me putting my one-time city editor hat on, but I mean, a story I'd love to see done here is an offshoot of this special project from the AJC would be to look at, now that we're 5 or maybe even close to 10 years out from the big boom of the student housing apartments that then Mayor McDavid had so championed, what has been the long-term effect of the student housing apartments and what those now go for on affordable housing in the community as a whole?
Yeah, that would be a good one. And also talk with developers. It's like, why can't we develop housing for a certain level? And maybe I think there's some obstacles in their way that's causing them not to be able to do and build more affordable housing. Investigate that story as well. That's something that more local news could do, is investigate that story, why developers can't do that.
Yeah, I think the other point to make here is developers have money. They can influence. They can use that money, and they do use that money to influence the political system. Who is going to speak up for the renters?
Yeah.
And that is something that is really that a local news organization can do and can put resources into it and can raise attention to issues like this in ways that it's really hard without a local newspaper to do. And I think it's important for the political system for those kinds of issues to be raised.
So I'd like to just, in the spirit of disclosure, say that a longtime friend of both mine and of the School of Journalism and IRE, which we're going to be talking about in a moment, the investigative reporters and editors, Charles Minshew, who has been with us for a long time, was one of the editors and worked on this project in some way. So I just, as a friend, want to disclose that as well. So Here's where we're going to get to that other part about IRE. You might remember that back in September, we talked a lot about the murder of Las Vegas Review-Journal reporter Jeff German. He had been reporting on government and corruption in that city for more than 4 decades, and it was a public official who was arrested and charged in his death. Well, since we were off last week, we didn't get a chance to talk about the publication of his final story, which happened about 10 days ago in both the RJ and the Washington Post. Kathy, tell us about how it is that the story ended up in the Post, because it's not about competition. It's actually kind of a really cool story that goes under the radar.
Yeah, it's about solidarity, and it really is in the tradition of the investigative reporters and editors. There's a great story on our Links blog about how it came to be by Jeremy Barr, one of the Washington Post media reporters. But it's this is a story of when German was killed. The Washington Post investigative editor, Craig Timberg, who is a great guy, who's the son of another great reporter, Baltimore Sun reporter, Robert Timberg, and he called the Las Vegas Review-Journal and said, can we help? Can we help finish German's last story? And the Washington Post sent a reporter an investigative reporter to Las Vegas to help finish that story, and the 2 papers jointly published it. And the Review-Journal put an editorial out explaining this and thanking the Washington Post publicly for its help, and that too is on our Links blog. And I think this is part of a really important tradition that IRE started. Right after IRE started, one of its charter members, Don Bowles, who was an investigative reporter in Arizona, was killed. And IRE members went to Arizona to finish his work. And this is squarely in that tradition, and the Post acknowledged that in what they did. It's a fantastic story.
Yeah, I love this tradition and solidarity that is among investigative reporters and editors, that they are willing to go in and help each other and help each other's organizations complete work that maybe wasn't completed when something like this happened. So I love that idea that we do that.
It's meant to be a deterrent and to send a message to the bad guys
You're
to
not
say,
going to silence us.
you will not
Our
silence
work
us.
will
Exactly.
continue.
We will not be silenced.
And so what did they find? What was this story? It had to do with a pretty big Ponzi
Well,
scheme.
and this is why investigative reporting is important, because this was about a Ponzi scheme that ripped off many people. They were targeting Mormons in an investment scheme, and the 2 guys who were the ringleaders were financing very lavish lifestyles and gambling addictions. In one case, on the retirement savings of all of these Mormons whom they had targeted. So being able to expose that, and this is the classic tradition of investigative reporting. You really are, in many cases, being the voice for the little person who doesn't have lobbyists and doesn't have lots of money and doesn't have a lavish lifestyle. And so this is what German was doing, and this is what the Washington Post helped to finish. It's really fantastic.
Well, and it even furthers the point you were making when we were talking about the housing rental story, too. This is purely local journalism. And yes, the Washington Post worked on that story, but it did so in the spirit of completing this major local journalism project. Well, that music means we are pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. Read more about each of the topics we talked about on our Links blog. That's under both the programs and the podcast tabs at kbia.org. We're also available wherever you get your podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave comments, questions, see what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Thanks to Travis McMillan for directing the show, to Kia Thomas for handling our audio, and Tim Pilcher for the original theme music. I'm Amy Simons. We'll see you next week.